You know, when you get to my age, you start to believe life can't surprise you anymore. But life, it always has one more heartbreak waiting. My name's Henry. I'm 76 years old. And I had one son. My pride, my shadow, my best friend, Michael. He wasn't just a good man. He was the kind of soul who'd pull over on the road to help a stranger fix a tire. The kind who'd laugh even when life kicked him in the teeth. When he brought Lena home for the first time, I could see it in his eyes. He was in love. She was beautiful, confident, and charming in that way city people are. But behind her smiles, there was something sharp, like a blade covered in honey. I remember the night they told me they were getting married. Michael was glowing with joy, and Lena leaned on his shoulder, her hand resting on his chest like she owned him already. "Dad," he said, "I finally found someone who makes me feel alive." I smiled, even though something in my chest tightened. "That's all that matters, son." For years, I stayed in the old family house, the one I built with my bare hands after my wife passed away. Michael and Lena lived across town in a modern apartment. I didn't visit much. Lena always seemed uncomfortable when I did. She said she was too busy, or the house wasn't tidy. But Michael came by every Sunday. He'd fix my porch light, bring groceries, or just sit with me while I told old war stories. I could still hear his laugh echo in the living room. It made that old house feel alive again. Then one morning, the world stopped turning. I got a call from the hospital. A drunk driver. Wrong lane. Instant. My son, my only son, was gone. You can't describe that kind of silence. It's the kind that swallows everything. The house, the photos, the air itself. All gone quiet. At his funeral, I stood beside Lena. She cried, but not like a wife mourning her soulmate. More like someone aware that everyone was watching. I told myself I was being unfair. Grief looks different on everyone, right? But then came the weeks after. And that's when the truth of who she was began to show. She stopped answering my calls. Stopped visiting. One day, I went to their house just to bring her flowers, thinking maybe we could share memories of Michael together. But when I knocked, she barely cracked the door open. "Oh, Henry," she said with a forced smile. "You really shouldn't come unannounced. I just wanted to see how you were doing," I said softly. She sighed. "I'm managing, but this house, it's full of memories. I might sell it soon." I froze. Sell it? That was Michael's dream home. Yes, and now it's too painful. I need a fresh start. I wanted to argue, but her tone made it clear I wasn't welcome. So I left. Weeks later, I got a letter, not from her but from a lawyer. A formal notice. The property will be transferred to Mrs. Lena Parker. The father of the deceased is requested to vacate the premises within 14 days. My hands shook reading those words. I called her, but she didn't pick up. So I went there myself. She opened the door wearing sunglasses, a phone in one hand, a smirk on her lips. "What is this, Lena? You're kicking me out of my own son's home." She shrugged. "It's my home now, Henry. The papers are clear. I have a life to live. You'll be fine." I stepped back, stunned. "I buried my boy a month ago, and you're throwing his father out?" She looked straight into my eyes. "Michael wanted me to be happy. Don't make this harder than it has to be." And then she shut the door, right in my face. That night, I sat outside my old house on the curb with a small bag of clothes, watching the lights turn off one by one. I don't remember crying. I think my soul was too empty for that. I rented a small room above a diner downtown. The walls smelled like fried oil and loneliness. But every night, I stared at the one picture I still had of Michael, him and me fishing at the lake. His smile lit up the whole frame. One evening, as I was cleaning out my old jacket, I found something strange tucked inside the lining. A small folded piece of paper, yellowed and creased. It was a letter, written by Michael. "Dad, if you're reading this, it means something's happened to me. Don't worry. I made sure you'll never be left alone. I took care of everything. Just trust me." My heart pounded as I read those words again and again. He took care of everything? What did he mean? The next morning, I decided to visit his lawyer, the same one who sent the eviction notice. I wanted answers. But before I continue, Let me ask you something, my friend. If your own child's spouse betrayed you after losing the one person you loved most, what would you do? Would you fight back, or just walk away? That's the question I asked myself every night before I discovered the truth that would change everything. I didn't sleep that night after finding Michael's letter. His handwriting kept echoing in my mind. Don't worry, Dad. I took care of everything. I sat by the window of that tiny room, the city noise humming like static outside, and I whispered into the dark. What did you mean, son? What did you do? The next morning, I put on my old brown jacket, grabbed the letter, and took the first bus downtown. I went straight to Michael's lawyer, Mr. Harvey. A tall man with gray hair and kind eyes, he had been our family's legal advisor for years. When he saw me, he stood up immediately. Henry, I was wondering when you'd come, he said softly. That line stopped me. You were expecting me? He nodded. Michael asked me to hold something in confidence, something only to be opened after a certain time. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. On the front, written in Michael's neat handwriting, were the words, "For my father, Henry Parker, when the time is right." I felt my throat tighten. Mr. Harvey looked at me carefully. Henry, your son was a very meticulous man. He knew what he was doing. With trembling hands, I broke the seal. Inside were several papers and another letter. Dad, if Lena's showing her true colors, don't be surprised. I had doubts too. I wanted to believe in her love, but something inside me warned me to prepare for the worst. So I did. Everything that was mine, the company shares, the insurance, the house, none of it goes to her directly. There's a condition in my will. One she doesn't know about. I read every word slowly, my heart pounding louder with each sentence. She'll get the house and the money. Only if she treats you with respect and allows you to live in the family home for the rest of your life. If she fails that, if she ever kicks you out, everything transfers to you instead. Dad. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the papers. Michael, my boy, had seen her for who she was, and he'd built a safety net not for himself, but for me. I looked up at Mr. Harvey, who was watching me quietly. She kicked me out 2 weeks after his death, I said. My voice was trembling, but steady. He exhaled slowly. Then, Henry, the will's condition has been broken. I leaned back in my chair, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Not joy, not revenge, but a deep, quiet justice. It wasn't about money. It was about dignity. About my son knowing the truth before the world did. Mr. Harvey placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. I'll make the arrangements, he said. There will be a formal will reading in 2 weeks. She'll be notified. When I left his office, I felt lighter, but also nervous. I didn't want vengeance. I just wanted peace. But peace, I've learned, sometimes comes only after the storm. Those next 2 weeks were strange. I went back to the diner, helped out in the mornings, swept floors, made coffee. The waitress, Annie, noticed I was smiling more. What happened, old man? She teased. I just said, my son's not done teaching me lessons yet. Then the day came. The will reading was held in a small conference room, mahogany table, leather chairs, polished floors. Lena arrived in designer black, pretending to be fragile. She barely looked at me. I sat quietly at the end of the table, my old hands folded over my cane. Mr. Harvey began reading the document in that slow, formal tone lawyers use. Lena's face softened when she heard her name tied to the inheritance. But then, as he reached the conditional clause, her expression froze. In the event that my wife, Lena Parker, fails to allow my father, Henry Parker, to remain in the family home for the rest of his life, all assets, including property and financial holdings, shall be transferred to Henry Parker immediately. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Lena blinked twice. Wait, what? Mr. Harvey repeated the line calmly. She turned toward me, her voice rising. You planned this with him. I shook my head slowly. No, Lena. He planned it. I just followed the path he left. Her lips trembled, but her eyes burned with anger. He's gone, Henry. You can't. I cut her off gently. He may be gone, but his love still protects me. Mr. Harvey continued reading, outlining how every violation of the condition nullified her rights. When he finished, he looked at her sympathetically. I'm afraid the documents are clear. She stood up so suddenly her chair fell backward. You can't take everything from me, she screamed. I looked at her for a long time, not with hate, but with sadness. Lena, I said softly, I lost my son. I don't care about the house. I care about the truth. And now, everyone finally sees it. She glared at me, breathing heavily, her eyes wet but furious. You'll regret this, old man. I shook my head. No, Lena. The only regret I have is ever believing you loved him for who he was. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. The lawyer leaned back, sighing. Michael really was a wise man. I smiled faintly. He was my son. He learned from the best mistakes I ever made. That night, I went back to my little rented room and sat by the window again. But this time, the night didn't feel so heavy. I felt Michael there in spirit, proud, protective, and still watching. And I whispered into the quiet, You took care of everything, son. You really did. You know, I thought that once the will was read, everything would finally quiet down. But life doesn't let old souls rest that easily. 3 days after the will reading, I got a letter in the mail, a legal notice. Lena was contesting the will. She claimed I manipulated Michael, that I somehow convinced him to write those clauses. When I read those words, I just smiled sadly. Because if there's one thing I learned in life, it's this: guilt makes people rewrite history in their minds. I showed the notice to Mr. Harvey the next morning. He adjusted his glasses and sighed. Henry, she doesn't have a case. Michael's will was airtight, but she'll fight anyway. Out of pride, not reason. I nodded. She's angry she lost control. That's all. The court hearings began 2 weeks later. I sat quietly every session, listening to her lawyers twist my son's words. They painted me as a manipulative father, a man who turned his son against his wife. And every time they said those lies, I'd close my eyes and picture Michael. His warm smile, his steady voice saying, It's okay, Dad. Just stay calm. Mr. Harvey defended the case with dignity. He brought forward the original recordings of Michael dictating the will. Michael's voice filled the courtroom, clear and calm. If you're listening to this, it means I'm gone. My father has been the one person who stood by me no matter what. If Lena can't honor that, then she doesn't deserve what I built. This isn't about money. It's about love, loyalty, and respect. The moment his voice echoed through the hall, even the judge fell silent. Lena looked shattered. Her face went pale, and her eyes dropped to the floor. The case was dismissed within minutes, and I just sat there, tears quietly sliding down my cheeks. Not because I won, but because I heard my son again. After the verdict, I walked out of the courthouse slowly. The autumn air was cool against my skin, the leaves falling in slow spirals. I stood there for a while, staring up at the gray sky, and I whispered, You were right, Michael. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it just breathes. Days turned into weeks. Lena disappeared from my life. I later heard she sold her car, moved out of town, and vanished somewhere up north. Maybe she wanted to start over. Maybe guilt caught up with her. I didn't wish her harm, just distance. I moved back into the family home. The first night there, I walked through every room, my hands touching the walls, the furniture, the memories. Michael's laughter still echoed faintly in the hallways, like a ghost made of love. I sat in his old study, the same one where he wrote his letters and planned his business. His photograph stood on the desk, smiling, confident, alive. I placed my trembling hand over it and said softly, You kept your promise, son. You really did take care of everything. Then I turned the house not into a mansion of silence, but into a home again. I invited my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, over for tea every Sunday. I helped the local school repair their playground. And every morning, I opened the windows wide and let sunlight fill the rooms, just the way Michael used to. Sometimes, people in town whispered about what happened. about the widow who lost everything, and the old man who got it all back. But what they didn't know is that I didn't get anything. I just kept what was already meant to stay in love's hands. A few months later, on a quiet Sunday morning, I found another letter, tucked in an old drawer of Michael's desk. It wasn't sealed, just folded neatly. When I opened it, the first line nearly broke me. Dad, if you're reading this, it means things didn't go smoothly after I left. But please, don't hold bitterness in your heart. You taught me that love is stronger when we forgive, even when people don't deserve it. I couldn't finish it right away. My hands were shaking too much. I sat back, took a deep breath, and smiled through my tears. You see, that's the thing about real love, it doesn't end with death. It lives in the way we remember, the way we carry their lessons. And that day, sitting alone in my son's study, I realized something I wish everyone could understand. Sometimes karma isn't about revenge. It's about redemption. It doesn't roar to destroy others. It whispers quietly, healing the hearts that were once broken. As I sit here now talking to you all, I can still feel my boy beside me. I can almost hear him laughing softly, saying, "You did good, Dad. You did good." And maybe that's all the peace a father ever really needs. You know, son, when people ask me what hurt the most, I don't say being thrown out. I say it was losing my place in the home I built with love. For months, I walked the same path every morning. Past that white fence, the one Michael painted when he was a boy. The same fence that stood between his home and mine. But every time I passed it now, it felt like it whispered, "You don't belong here anymore." Still, I couldn't stop myself. I'd glance at that big house, the one I helped him buy, fix, and fill with dreams. And I'd imagine him stepping out the front door, coffee mug in hand, calling, "Morning, Dad." But all that was gone. Then one morning, as I was sitting by my small rented room's window, a knock came at the door. It was Mr. Harvey again, holding an envelope and a faint smile. "Henry," he said, "Michael prepared more than just his will. There's something he wanted you to have privately." My heart skipped. My fingers trembled as I tore open the seal. Inside was a small USB drive and a note in Michael's handwriting. "Play this when you're ready, Dad." I waited until evening. I brewed my tea, sat down by the desk, and plugged the drive into an old laptop. And then, my son's face appeared on the screen. He looked tired, maybe from the sickness he hid from me, but still smiled with that familiar calm. "Hey, old man," he chuckled softly. "If you're watching this, I guess I didn't make it. I know Lena probably wasn't kind to you. She's not a bad person, Dad. She's just lost in her own pain. But listen carefully. I left something for you." He paused, and I leaned closer to the screen, my breath caught in my throat. Behind my study bookshelf, bottom right corner, there's a small safe. The code is your birthday. Inside, you'll find something that belongs to you, and a letter for her too. Please, give it to her when the time feels right. I sat there frozen for a while. His voice echoed like a ghost in the room. When it ended, I just stared at the dark screen. That night, I barely slept. My heart raced, my thoughts tangled between pain and purpose. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I went back to that house, the one Lena had abandoned after the court case. It sat silent and cold, just like the memories it held. The key still worked. I stepped inside. Dust covered the floors, curtains half drawn, the air thick with loneliness. I walked straight to Michael's study. The bookshelf was there, just as he'd said. I knelt down, felt behind the bottom right shelf, and there it was, a small metal safe. The numbers turned slowly beneath my trembling hands. 0-7-1-9. My birthday. The door clicked open. Inside was an envelope, a small velvet box, and another note. The note read, "Dad, I knew Lena wouldn't understand love the way you did. This box has your old wedding ring, the one you sold when times were tough. I bought it back years ago. You never knew, but I did. Keep it, and remember, love always circles back." I held that box like it was made of glass. My tears fell onto it. I opened it and saw the gold ring, shining faintly in the dim light. the same one I'd once slipped onto my late wife's hand. Then I noticed the second envelope marked, for Lena. I hesitated. My anger said, she doesn't deserve it. But Michael's voice in my heart whispered, promise me, Dad. So I promised. The next day, I asked Mr. Harvey to deliver the envelope to her. No questions asked. A week passed. Then, out of nowhere, Lena showed up at my doorstep. Her eyes were swollen, not from anger, from tears. She stood there silently for a long time before she finally said, I read his letter. I didn't speak. I just watched her. A woman once filled with arrogance, now trembling like a child. He told me how much you meant to him, how he forgave me before he even left. I don't know how to live with that. Her voice cracked. She looked at the floor. Then she whispered, I'm sorry, Henry, for everything. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. But it was real. And somehow, that mattered more than anything else. That night, I lit a candle beside Michael's photo and said, you were right, son. Love really does find its way home. And for the first time in years, I slept peacefully. It's funny how quiet the world gets when peace finally settles in. These days, my mornings start with coffee, birdsong, and sunlight pouring through the same window that once framed my loneliness. But now it feels different, warmer. Lena sends me postcards sometimes. She moved to another state, started volunteering at a hospice. In her last letter, she wrote, I think I finally understand what Michael meant about love outliving pain. I smiled when I read that. Maybe that's what my boy wanted all along, for both of us to heal. I still visit Michael's grave every Sunday. I bring 2 flowers, one from me, one from her. I sit on the old bench nearby, the wind brushing against my silver hair, and I talk to him softly. Your old man's still here, kid. Still fighting the good fight. Sometimes I imagine he's listening, maybe even smiling. You know, folks, life has a strange way of balancing things. People think karma is loud, that it comes crashing down like thunder. But I've learned it's quieter. Sometimes karma wears the face of forgiveness. Sometimes it arrives in a letter that says I'm sorry. When I look back now, I don't see a cruel woman anymore. I see a broken one who didn't know how to handle loss. And maybe I see a version of myself too. A man who held on to pain for too long. One evening, I was cleaning out the attic when I found an old cassette player. Inside was a tape labeled, For Dad 2002. I pressed play. It was Michael, much younger, maybe 20. Hey, old man, if you ever find this, I probably messed up and forgot to give it to you on your birthday. Just wanted to say you're my hero, Dad. I hope one day I make you proud. That was it. Just 30 seconds. But those 30 seconds carried more peace than all the years of silence combined. I laughed through tears, shaking my head. You always did know how to surprise me, boy. Now I sit here, in this little house filled with echoes and warmth, telling you my story. Maybe you're listening from across the world, maybe from the next town over, but I want you to remember this. If life ever throws you out, if people treat your kindness like weakness, don't lose faith in love or in time. Because sometimes the things meant for you, your peace, your justice, your love, they find you again. And when they do, you'll realize the truth I learned too late. That forgiveness isn't about letting others off the hook. It's about freeing your own soul to rest. I look out the window now, the same sun my son once watched rise, and whisper softly, You did good, Michael. You really did. Then I turn to you, the listener, the friend sharing this moment with me, and say with a trembling smile, if you've ever lost everything, just remember, the story isn't over until love speaks again.